Hello, cats! Welcome back to another episode of Chat About That. I'm your host, Bella, and in this episode, I'm going to be chatting about underrated horror films. Before I chat about that, I just wanted to mention that I really wanted to post 2 episodes last month. I've been really trying to keep up a schedule of 2 episodes per month, but the last half of September was really busy for me, and I just didn't have the time to dedicate to sitting down and recording a podcast. It would have just been something that I put together really quickly and something that I don't think I would have been as proud of. So that's why I only had 1 episode last month, but I'm really going to try and prioritize everything and make sure that I post 2 times a month for you guys, because I love recording these podcasts and posting about things that I love. I also wanted to mention the updates on the Breonna Taylor case. So the one cop was charged with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighbor's apartment, but he was not charged with the murder of Breonna Taylor, which is absolutely ridiculous. And the 2 other officers who were involved in her murder have not even been charged at all. So this is really disappointing, and obviously this is not justice if the people who have murdered Breonna Taylor are not being rightfully charged with her murder. So that's incredibly disappointing, and I'm going to continue to do more research and continue to follow this case and the rest of the Black Lives Matter movement, because this is not a fad. This is not, a hot topic right now. Black Lives Matter, and Black people are being killed all over the world, and especially in this country. And we can't stay silent. We can't look at this as being, something that's going on right now and then stop talking about it in 2 months. This is a huge issue, and I did have a whole episode on Black Lives Matter and Trans Lives Matter, and if you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend that you do, because I go into a lot more detail. But this is something that's not going to go away, and we need full justice for all of these murders. So I just wanted to keep you updated on Breonna Taylor, and I'm going to continue to do more research and educate myself on other cases and keep updating all of you, because this is important and we need to talk about this and we need to say their names. That's all the updates that I wanted to mention right now. There are going to be a couple of other updates in upcoming episodes, but I just wanted to mention that for now. So let's begin chatting about some of my favorite underrated horror films and a couple of other honorable mentions. The first underrated horror film on my list came out in 2019, and it's called Ready or Not. The film stars Samara Weaving, and she is actually in another film that I'm going to mention later in the podcast. But she plays a young woman named Grace who is marrying into this very rich, very extravagant family. And she doesn't really have any family of her own, so she's kind of excited but also worried about marrying into this big family when she didn't really have one of her own. With this film and the rest of the films, I'm not going to be giving away the entire plot. This is not a movie review. This is just a recommendation. So I'm basically going to be only giving away what the trailer does. So that way, if you want to actually go and watch these films, you're not completely spoiled by this podcast. On her wedding night, she is invited by her husband, Daniel, to play a board game with her family. And he says that this is a tradition that every person who marries into the family has to play a board game on the night of their wedding. And she thinks it's kind of weird, because it is, but she agrees. And they give her this weird box, and she has to basically click a button and a card pops out and it says what game they're playing. And the game that she is playing is hide and seek. And everyone in the room gets really excited, but her fiance is really freaked out. So basically she ends up hiding, and she's like, this is super weird, like why am I playing this? This is so weird. And while she's hiding, she quickly figures out that they're not just seeking her, they're seeking her to kill her. So that is basically the plot of the film. And she basically has to run around this big mansion, and she's never been there before. She's running around this mansion, and they're all hunting her. And the reason why, I'm not going to completely give it away, but basically they believe that they have to kill her before sunrise or something really bad is going to happen. And based on the trailer, and again, I'm not going to spoil everything, but it's sort of culty, sort of ritualistic as to why they're trying to get her. So she spends the whole movie trying to run away from them, but also trying to figure out why they're doing this. Why do they think they have to kill her? And that's all I'm going to give away for the plot of this film. Now, the reason why I'm including this on underrated horror films is because it came out in 2019, so it didn't come out that long ago, but I didn't really hear a whole lot of people talking about this. I mean, obviously, like in the horror space, it's pretty popular, but I don't think it's as widespread as, say like Scream or, the Final Destination films or things like that. But another reason why I wanted to include it on this list and kind of include it first on this list is because it's actually a comedy horror film. So if you're somebody who doesn't really like horror movies, like if you're really scared by like Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream and Halloween and you just really don't like horror movies, I would recommend watching this because it's more suspenseful horror than it is like, psychological thrillers. There are some psychological thrillers and slasher films later on this list, but this is definitely a very tame movie. I say that this is a good movie for people to watch if they're getting into horror and they, want to watch something to ease them into it. I definitely recommend this film. Another reason I'm including this on the list is because it's very clever the way the film is created and the cinematography is very good. Just the acting is so great and the plot and the, just the way it's structured is very clever and it just keeps you interested throughout the whole movie. Sometimes I find horror films, they kind of get boring halfway through if it's just a full-on slasher movie or if it's a really weird psychological movie. Sometimes they can seem a little I don't want to say boring, but they can kind of lose your attention sometimes because they're not like fast-paced enough, and I think horror movies have to be done really well to keep people's attention and to keep people like not turning it off if it's too gross or whatever. So this movie does keep your attention, and I love that the lead of this film is a woman. And there are a couple of other films on this list that have a woman as the main character, and I think she just does a really good job in this. She's very believable. Everybody is very believable. It's very well done, and again, it's a great film to get you into horror because it's funny and there's a lot of, yes, there's gore in it, but I find that it's more comedy and it's more of like a mystery than just a straight up horror film. So I highly recommend this movie, Ready or Not. As of October 2020, it is currently on HBO. So I have HBO Max. So it is available to watch on streaming services if you have HBO Max. So again, Ready or Not, definitely top horror film that you need to check out. The next movie that I want to talk about was released in 2014 and it's titled Horns. And it's actually another comedy horror film, but it is based off of a novel by a man named Joe Hill. It stars Daniel Radcliffe and Juno Temple as the main characters, and Daniel Radcliffe plays Ig and Juno Temple plays Marin. And they're a couple, and the beginning of the film, it's really happy. They're, in love, and one day Ig finds Marin in the woods and she had been raped and murdered. Yes, I know, starting off very sad, and how is that a comedy horror film if that's how it's beginning out? But he finds her in the woods and he is absolutely shocked, and the community believes that he had done this to her, and he says that he's innocent and nobody's believing him, and he's hiding from the community, and he wakes up the next morning with a horrible headache and he has these weird bumps coming out of his forehead, and basically throughout the film he starts growing like horns. That's why it's called Horns. But he starts growing these kind of like devilly goat horns out of his head, and he has absolutely no idea what's going on. And everyone in the community believes that he murdered her. So the film basically centers around him simultaneously growing these horns, but also trying to figure out who killed his girlfriend and why and what the motive was. And all of these weird, strange, like supernatural things start happening to him. He starts to be able to communicate with snakes and other weird creatures. And the reason why I recommend this film, again, it's a comedy horror, so it's not a super traditional horror. I think you're going to start to see a pattern with the films that I'm mentioning here, that a lot of them are more comedy horror, more psychological thrillers. They're not a lot of like demon possession, really slasher movie. I mean, I do enjoy a good slasher film, but most of the films that I am mentioning here are either comedy horror or, they're more psychological. But the reason I am recommending this is, one, I think Daniel Radcliffe does a phenomenal job in this film. I've mentioned this before on the podcast that I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and, watching someone in a specific role for so long, you kind of see them as that character. And when I'm watching this film, I don't see him as Harry Potter at all. He's incredibly believable. He really commits his character. I think the film has a lot of twists and turns in it, and you're never really sure what's going to happen. You're really hoping that the plot pans out the way that you want it to, but there's a lot of twists in the film. And I think that Daniel and Juno give a really good performance. There's a couple of really difficult scenes in the film, and it's just really believable. I also think it's a really interesting story of morality and, how people can really redeem themselves or really self-sabotage themselves. And it's just a really good story altogether. And it's also very paranormal, and I wouldn't say it's demon possession. So, if you're afraid of those types of movies, you definitely don't need to be afraid of this. But it's a roller coaster of a movie, I definitely would say. So I highly recommend this film. Currently, it is on Netflix. So if you have Netflix, you're able to watch it right now. But it's very different than a lot of movies that I've seen. And it goes back and forth between him as a child, current time, and then right before his girlfriend was murdered. So there's a lot of different time jumps in it. I mean, I wouldn't say time jumps necessarily, but there's a lot of different time periods in it that you're learning, and you kind of have to put together the puzzle yourself. And once you do put together it's a real big twist in the end. And I just really like it. And the ending of the film, I think the ending scene is really well done. So again, Horns, highly recommend that you check this one out. This next film is definitely more scary and definitely more psychological than the previous movies. This one came out in 2013 and it's called Oculus. The movie stars Karen Gillan and Brenton Thwaites, and they star as brother and sister Tim and Kaylee. So the film begins with Kaylee, Karen Gillan, and she's found this mirror that used to be in their house when they were younger. And so they team up and they get the mirror and they bring it back to their old house. And they made a promise when they were kids that they were going to kill the mirror. So basically, throughout the movie, the mirror shifts reality. And when you're looking in it and when you're in the same room or the same house as it changes reality and twists things around, and basically it's trying to kill you. The flashbacks that they have is the dad's sort of, psychological, I wouldn't say breakdown, but he's basically being influenced by the mirror. And when they were younger, they saw that this mirror was influencing him and making him do things. And they spend the whole movie trying to kill this mirror. And I know that sounds really dumb. When you say it like that, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. But they are basically recording the mirror and recording what's going on in the house so that they can prove that there's some sort of supernatural force within the mirror that is twisting what they're doing and also twisting what their father did. So you learn that the father was, influenced and possessed by this mirror and ultimately caused his death and the mother's death. And the siblings are trying to destroy it and trying to figure out really the root of what is behind this mirror. So the whole film, it's a flashback of when they're younger and when they're currently in the house. And there's a lot of psychological twists within the movie. And the reason why I just think it's really good is because, again, like Ready or Not, it keeps your attention and you really want to know what's happening. It's definitely an underrated film because I don't think it was super popular when it came out. It probably has a big cult following now, at least within the horror space. But it's a really interesting plot line. And again, it sounds really dumb when I say it out loud, but I think the fact that when you're watching it, you're not sure what's real and what's not, just like the characters are. And you're sort of learning along with the characters what's happened. And as the flashbacks unfold, you realize more and more. And again, I think the ending of the film is definitely a big, I don't want to say it's a twist, but it's definitely unexpected at what happens in the end of the movie, which is actually based on a short film that came out in 2005 that's also called Oculus. And there's a lot of sort of found footage type filming in the movie. The whole thing isn't found footage, but it definitely has that element to it. So if you like those kinds of movies, I think you would like this a lot. It was on Netflix, I think, a year ago. However, you can rent it right now on Amazon Prime. So I'm not able to find it freely available on streaming services. But I do really like Oculus because I think it's definitely scarier than some of these other movies. But it's definitely one of those movies where if you are not scared by horror movies at all, you might find this to be kind of funny, just because it has that element of, you know, what's real and what's not, and you're kind of having to figure out, you know, did what just happened really happen, or was it the mirror, you know, causing them to hallucinate and see things. I think that the two lead actors give a really good performance. I do like the cinematography. Again, like I said, I think if you're a really huge horror fan, you're not going to be scared by it, but if you're somebody who is, you know, dipping your feet into horror movies, I think that you'll like it. When I originally saw it, I did think it was a bit scary. It's not horribly, you know, like Exorcist level scary, but it's definitely not as tame as Ready or Not, but it's not horribly overly scary. So again, Oculus, definitely recommend you check it out. The next film on my list is one of my absolute favorite Netflix original movies. I am going to be doing an episode all about my favorite Netflix originals, and I will be talking about this movie again, probably not in as much detail, but this movie is one of my favorites. So good. I've seen it maybe like 3 or 4 times, and the sequel just came out as well. This is a film that came out in 2017, and it's called The Babysitter. This movie also stars Samara Weaving, who starred in Ready or Not. This movie stars Judah Lewis as Cole, and Cole is in high school. I believe in this film he's a freshman in high school, and he is just, he's a weird kid. He doesn't really have a whole lot of friends. He's bullied a lot, and he still has a babysitter whose name is B, who's played by Samara Weaving. And his parents go away for a night, and B is babysitting him. And B has been his babysitter for a very long time, and he's kind of at the age where he doesn't really need a babysitter, but he needs, you know, a friend, and he needs somebody to, you know, stand up for him and look out for him. And so they're having a good time, they're hanging out, and she says, okay, it's time for bed. And he's, you know, waiting to go to sleep, and he's in his room, and he hears people come into the house. So he goes out of his room, and the way that their house is set up, he can look over the balcony and see down into their living area. And he sees that B has invited over a bunch of friends, and they're playing Spin the Bottle. And he's, you know, an adolescent kid, and he, you know, wants to see what's going on. So he's watching them play Spin the Bottle, and all of a sudden, B gets up to kiss this one guy that they invited over, and she stabs him and kills him and starts draining his blood into a chalice. And of course, just like the audience, Cole is completely freaked out and runs into his room and is like, what the hell is going on? And he learns that they're going to use him as a sacrifice. So again, like Ready or Not, he spends the movie running away from these crazy people who are trying to kill him, and also trying to figure out why they're sacrificing him. Now that I'm realizing it's sort of similar to Ready or Not in the sense that they're trying to capture him and sacrifice him, but they're not the same movie at all. So definitely recommend watching both of them. It sounds a little bit similar, but it's not. The reason why I like this movie is because I would say out of like all of the movies that I'm mentioning, this is definitely the most comical. There is gore, and there is like the sacrificing aspect, and, you know, the fact that they're trying to chase this teenager down and, you know, sacrifice him, but it's very, very funny. I would say it's way more funny than it is horror. I would say it's a comedy movie with, you know, blood and guts. Again, this is a really great movie if you're getting into horror, or if you really like comedy movies but you want something a little bit more gritty. This is definitely for you. I also like that this movie stars a younger actor who is going through something that is very adult, and it has that comedy of him being a teenager, and you get inside of his head, and, you know, you really are experiencing the movie through the way he's experiencing it, which I really like. I also think that, again, the acting is really good in the film. I think the gore is done pretty well. And it is, I guess, if you're like a huge horror fan, it could be considered a bit cheesy, but I think that's kind of the point. It's very self-aware of the comedy and what it's doing. It doesn't take itself seriously. And I think it's a really good movie. Like I mentioned earlier, the sequel just came out last month. And I did watch the sequel. I didn't like it as much as the first movie. I didn't think it was bad at all, but I definitely liked the first one better. But I think that it really did tie into the first one, obviously the sequel, but it really did feel like a continuation. It didn't feel like, just the same thing over again. The sequel does have a similar plot line, but it really felt like a continuation, and there is a plot point that they mention in the second movie that really makes the first movie, when I go back and watch the first movie, it definitely kind of changes the way you view it. So I definitely recommend watching these movies. They're really hilarious. I did show these movies to a couple of my friends, and you seem to enjoy it. My one friend, she really doesn't like horror movies, so she thought it was too gory, but she did think it was, comical. So again, The Babysitter, please check it out. I think Samara Weaving definitely proves herself with these films and with Ready or Not that she can really act in horror movies, but she's also a comedic actress at the same time. So I think she has a lot of range. I've seen her in a couple of other things, and I think she's a really good actress. So I'm hoping to see her in some other roles in the future because I think she's a really good actress. Judah Lewis does a really good job too as Cole. And there's some other notable actors and actresses in the film. So again, very self-aware movie and just a really good time if you're looking for something funny, but you also kind of want something a little gritty. Definitely check out The Babysitter. The next film I'm going to talk about is actually a South Korean action horror film that came out in 2016, and it's called Train to Busan. So this movie is about a father who is living with his mother and his daughter. And basically he's not a very attentive father. He's constantly working, and the daughter really wants to go visit their mother in Busan. And so he agrees to take her on the train to go visit the mother. And while they're on the train, there is a zombie outbreak. So yes, this movie is a zombie film. So if you love zombie movies, this is definitely a good one to watch. But I'll go into this a little later, but it's not horribly scary. And the zombies are really well done. But it's basically a zombie survival film that takes place in South Korea. And the reason why I like it is not just because the zombies are done really well and, the makeup and the cinematography, again, really, really well done, but there's an overarching theme of family in this movie. When you come down to it, that is the main focus of this movie, is family. And it's all about, caring for the people that you have in your life, but also helping others, and how you can become a family with people that you meet, and how disasters and horrible situations can bring people together. There's a lot of, I guess, morality in this movie. There's a lot of, what would you do in this situation scenarios. I think that the acting is really well done. It is currently on Netflix and Shudder, which is it's basically a Netflix for horror movies. So it's on both of those platforms right now. And it's in Korean, so you do have to watch with subtitles. It's not dubbed, which another movie on this list is dubbed in English, which I will mention later. But I watched this movie with my boyfriend, and it was definitely a movie that kept my attention the whole time. I think, and I mentioned this earlier, I think especially with zombie movies, I feel like it can kind of get old after a while, and once you figure out how to kill the zombies, because each zombie movie or, book or whatever has its own way of how you can kill a zombie. Like on The Walking Dead, you have to do a headshot. Some zombies, you can kill them by chopping their heads off and, things like that. So once you figure out how to kill them, it kind of gets old because you're just like, oh, just shoot them in the head or whatever. But this movie definitely keeps your attention because it focuses on a couple of different groups of people. They're all not connected, but they all meet on the train, but it follows these different groups, and it's very interesting. It's a very good example of morality and what would you do in this situation, and also the lengths that a parent would go to protect their child. It's really good. It's definitely one of those movies where the ending it's not really open-ended, but it's definitely very, you leave the movie feeling differently than you felt when you started the movie. And I don't want to give it away, but it's definitely a movie that you think about after you watched it. I think it's really well done. Again, the makeup is so good. There's a lot of practical effects. I'm sure there are, CGI in the film, but it's mostly practical effects, which I really like, especially in horror movies. I find it to be a lot more realistic and a lot more scary when it's actually somebody who's dressed up like a zombie and when they do a lot of practical effects. So it's definitely interesting. And I've seen a lot of zombie movies and seen a couple of other international zombie movies, and I would say that this is definitely my favorite of international zombie films. It's a very interesting movie, and I definitely recommend you watching it. And I don't want to give a whole lot of it away because this is definitely more of an unknown movie on this list. So again, Train to Busan on Netflix and Shudder. Highly recommend that you check it out. Now that I've gone over those underrated horror films, I want to give a shout out to a couple of honorable mentions that I don't have time to go into detail in this episode, but I do want to mention because I love them and they're definitely underrated and definitely films that I think people should check out. The first film is called Winchester, and it came out in 2018, and it's all about the Winchester Mansion that is in California. And it's all about Sarah Winchester, who is the wife of William Winchester, who was the founder and creator of the Winchester rifle. So this film basically is about the home, the Winchester Mansion that she built, and all of the supernatural activity that went on. Yes, the movie isn't 100% accurate, but it does follow the story and all of the supernatural craziness that went on around the house. I do want to focus an episode about the Winchester Mansion just because I find it really fascinating. So look out for that upcoming episode on the Winchester Mansion. But definitely check out this movie, Winchester. It's on Netflix. The next movie I want to talk about is also on Netflix. It's a Spanish film, so you can watch it in Spanish with English subtitles, or you can be like me and watch it dubbed in English, because I had just finished watching Narcos, and that had a lot of Spanish speaking and English subtitles in it, and I just didn't feel like reading the subtitles the whole time. So this movie, The Platform, came out in 2019. The plot is that there is a vertical prison and a platform descends from the top level all the way to the bottom level, and that is the food that all the prisoners have. So basically, the people on the top level of the prison get all the food, and then as it goes down, there's less and less food. It's sort of reminiscent of the movie Snowpiercer, which I don't like at all. I can go into that in another episode. But The Platform, it's very interesting. It's definitely a commentary on class systems and the prison system. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% horror, but it's definitely a psychological thriller. And I really liked this movie. I know a couple of other people that have seen the movie and they really enjoyed it. And it's definitely different than all the other films on this list, but I do think you should check it out, The Platform. The next movie is actually a Netflix original, and it's called Velvet Buzzsaw, and it stars Jake Gyllenhaal as an art critic, and basically it's a commentary on the world of artists and what it means to be an artist. I don't really want to give away too much of this because it's definitely a more different film, and I don't want to give away too much by telling the entire plot line of the movie, but basically this one character finds out that someone in her building had passed away, and she goes into his apartment because the door is open, and he has all of these paintings, and she decides to say that she created all these paintings, and a lot of weird supernatural things start happening because of this, and it's very different, and it's a little more scary than some of these other movies, but it's not horribly scary. But it's definitely one that I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I was very pleasantly surprised, and I really love this movie. So check out The Velvet Buzzsaw. The next film is also a Netflix original. It's called Before I Wake, and it came out in 2016, and it stars Kate Bosworth and Jacob Tremblay. Kate Bosworth and her husband adopt a little boy who is Jacob Tremblay, and weird things start happening when he falls asleep, and he starts to manifest sort of creatures when he's sleeping, and they are really freaked out by it, and they have to figure out what's causing this. I think this movie has one of the best twists in the end out of all of these films that I've mentioned. It definitely has a lot more jump scares than some of these other movies, but it's very different, and it's It's kind of sad, but it's also just has a really good twist in the end. And I think a lot of people, especially horror fans, will really like this film. Check out Before I Wake. Last movie on the list, I don't really know if this is an underrated film because a lot of people who are horror fans have definitely heard of, if not seen, this movie. But it's called Cabin in the Woods. It came out in 2011, and it's another horror comedy movie. And when you start the movie, you're really not sure what is going on in the movie. And then as it goes on, you figure it out, and it's a commentary on film itself. And I would definitely say this is a lot more funny than some of the other movies. It's kind of more like your typical slasher film. It definitely has a cult following among horror fans, but I think it's more underrated than, say Scream or Halloween. So definitely check out The Cabin in the Woods. It's a good time. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning about some underrated horror films, and I hope that you'll check them out. Again, I will be doing more research into the Breonna Taylor case as well as some other Black Lives Matter cases because, like I said, this is not a fad. This is not something that's just going to go away. This is not something that we can and should stop talking about. We need to continue bringing justice to all of these people and continuing to say their names. The next episode is going to be very spooky, so get ready for that. Please check out some of these films and let me know if you enjoyed them or if you've seen them and you hate them and you think that I was wrong with this list. Like always, stay safe, stay classy, stay spooky, and I will chat again with you soon. Goodbye.